Welcome to our Book Talk webinar at the Prince Al Walid bin Talal Center for Muslim Christian Understanding at Georgetown University. My name is John Vall. I am going to be serving as the moderator for this important discussion of the book, How Millennials Can Lead Us Out of the Mess That We're In. Most of us are used to interreligious dialogue where basically you get separate actors, separate people, separate spokespersons who represent distinctive religious traditions. That fits into the pattern that we've all been pretty much trained in. If you want to know about world religions and take a course in it, you have separate sections in the course or separate sections in the book on world religions on each of the separate religions. And that general way of approaching things tends still to be the concept behind interreligious dialogue. You have separate groups of people talking to each other. Today, however, we're working within a different kind of framework. We're working within a framework that starts with the idea that these Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, or that the world religions are not separate boxes that are distinct and you follow a checklist, and if you fit the checklist, you're in, and if you don't fit the checklist, you're out. Instead of that, we have a session in which the faith of the people that are in the discussion, the faiths of the people that are in discussion, share important symbols, share important kind of themes and trends. Now, this means that you have then, as they share, you have certain kinds of figures, you have certain kinds of ideas that people recognize as being common within the different religious traditions. One of those in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, one of those kind of symbols or figures is the figure of the individual person, the leader, Moses. And we are going to be having a discussion which represents not a definition of separate and different views that then have to be somehow integrated, but rather we are looking at a discourse, a discussion that uses the same vocabulary, bringing different insights. The description of the morning session, now it's afternoon, talks about the book that three people have written called How Millennials Can Lead Us Out of the Mess That We're In. A Jew, a Muslim, and a Christian share leadership lessons from the life of Moses. Now, the description of that book says, this leadership book is a unique attempt to synthesize religious views of Judaism, Islam, and Christianity into one unified, harmonious voice singing a single hymn. Now, that's a pretty tall bill, but one of the words in there I want to emphasize is the word harmonious, harmony. If everyone is singing absolutely the same note, you may have a nice, clear note, but you don't have harmony. Harmony comes when you have different notes that blend together to create beautiful music. Now, I won't call this book beautiful music, but I will call it an effort to create a harmonious vision, a harmonious conversation, a harmonious discourse using a shared figure like Moses. Now, I've avoided the word prophet because I didn't want to necessarily make you all think that we were talking about an economic thing of profit sharing, but instead we have shared concepts and shared heroes and shared symbols within the discourse. The people who are bringing this special discussion to us and who have brought this special book to us are, as the blurb says, a Jew, a Muslim, and a Christian. Dr. Ian Pennett has a PhD in journalism and mass communications. He teaches currently at Kansas State. He is the author of a number of books and provides an important kind of blending of practical experience in communication with awareness of importance of religious leadership. We have Rabbi Mordecai Schreiber, who's a Reform rabbi born in Israel, author of many, many books on both history and biblical scholarship, and is also has an important service and corporation up in Bethesda for translation for government and private sources. And the third speaker is Dr. Iqbal Yunus, who's an old friend of the Center for Muslim Christian Understanding here at Georgetown. He has worked with us on a number of projects and has an important association with the International Institute of Islamic Thought. Now, I don't want to blabber on anymore. I want to hear what our guests are saying, and so we will be in the order. That was listed in the announcement of the meeting. Dr. Ian, Rabbi Mordecai, and Dr. Iqbal. So let's go ahead.
Well, thank you so much for having us, and I just prefer Ian, and I appreciate that, though, for the way in which you so perfectly described the effort. And like any, partly academic effort, this is the first part of a conversation which we hope will continue. And we make no claim to have definitively settled the subject, but rather to have informed the subject from these different religious perspectives. Mine comes from my background in Reformed theology. I went to a Presbyterian seminary, Columbia Theological Seminary in Atlanta, but I became ordained in the Episcopal Church. And those two experiences, especially with the emphasis on Hebrew and what we would call Old Testament studies, it was revelatory to me how often we lose the core message of all of these great faiths in pursuit of denominationalism, which I find repugnant anyway. So this was not a stretch. We didn't have to lay down our weapons. We didn't really have to make any concerted effort to have conversation. We just did. And this was the form that it took. We structured our conversation about the leadership lessons from Moses to look candidly at the next generation of leaders who are coming online. The sooner the better. And that would be millennials, the largest cohort right now, of demographically that has come on to the U.S. experience, this, our democratic capitalistic experiment in history. And they bring with it some unique characteristics that we think were consistent with the Moses experience, what the narrative tells us about what Moses went through, both individually and then what the children of Israel went through in seeking their freedom and prosperity. And then we also looked at the group that's coming behind us, a little bit behind them, which would be Generation Z, which will be even larger than millennials. And for a group that isn't, they aren't regular churchgoers, whether they be Jews or Muslims or Christians. They may not be regular attendees in worship services, but they love the conversation, and they are still interested in faith. They're still interested in the values that these religions aspire toward, although they are less interested in the fights that have developed as a result. So that's why we thought this was sort of a perfect approach to that group, and to help give them some foundational understandings of Moses from these three different traditions, to help build them both as better individuals and as future leaders in any aspect. So whether that be politically, economically, socially, that this is the group that we want to see live up to what Moses was leading us to be.
Great. Okay, thank you. Okay, Iqbal?
Uh, well, Ian has expressed the project so thoroughly and so well. Let me just share a few ideas that kind of motivated me, or maybe my contribution to the whole project. And that is a thought that I look at the scriptural uh, text, the divine revealed text, whether we're speaking from the Jewish point of view or the Christian or the Muslim point of view, as books of guidance. And so the focus has to be on the lessons to be learned as opposed to the details of what happened, when happened, with whom it happened, and so on. And so one way, or one thing that I had in mind in dealing with this story is what are the lessons that we share between the three traditions, as opposed to just getting bogged down into certain details and certain differences. The second idea was that there is if you look at leadership, it's of course timeless. And they have been leaders forever. I mean, since men began to organize themselves into societies and communities, they have been leaders. But for people of faith, when we talk about leadership and think of contemporary concepts of leadership and the contemporary practice of leadership, if we can somehow link it to the scriptures and link it to the lessons that the scriptures teach us, and look at the people and the figures and the circumstances that are shown to us in the scriptures, then those contemporary lessons become more internalized, because now they are connected, not simply theories and experiments and ideas, but they are connected to the very nature of the highest level of guidance, the divine guidance that we believe in. So once we take lessons in contemporary leadership, whether it's lessons like communication and delegation and teamwork and all those kind of tools of the trade, so to say. And if you think of them and link them to divine guidance, then they become more of a part of our personality. We don't have the dichotomy, and we are able to practice them and utilize them in a better way. Now, in terms of the figure of Moses, that particular situation, obviously, everybody knows Moses is common to the three traditions, not only common, but central to the message and revered in each of the traditions. In the case of the Quran, as some of you might know already, it's the story of Moses is spread throughout the text, about 130 or some references in about 23 chapters. And that story forms a very fundamental part of the lessons that the Quran is trying to teach. Now, people sometimes wonder why the story is spread all over the text as opposed to being in one chapter or two chapters and so on. It's spread because the Quranic way of teaching is to place things in context. And so the story is broken into parts, and then each part it teaches a lesson. And some are direct to the story, and some are incidental to whatever else is happening. But the idea is they are spread throughout because they teach lessons, and that is what we need to really focus on. And just the last thing, because I see the rabbi is back, and just to make a last point, and that is that the story of Moses, the underlying story, is a very common theme. I mean, you have an oppressed people, whether the oppressed people exist in a land or in an office or at home, and there is an overbearing ruler, and whether that is your boss or that is a leader in a nation. Uh, and then you have a reluctant challenger to the circumstances. And that's a prophet, a messenger, or that could be an ordinary person who is certainly called upon, and he has a latent leadership skill. We'll talk about that later, and becomes the challenger to the status quo. And then you have the status quo is broken. You have people who are freed, and they are now searching for something new, searching for their promised land, so to say. They're looking for a new worldview. And so the structure of this thing is common to our experiences, whether they are contemporary or they are ancient. And if we can connect these all these ideas, I think we can certainly benefit from the story of Moses. I hope that does it.
Sounds good. We can move on. Rabbi?
Yes, I think I was having some internet problems. But anyway, as I started saying, there are two strands. One is leadership, which is a very urgent problem at this moment around the world. And what this book does is offer some key aspects of Moses' leadership as his style of management, sharing, finding the best people for the right job, and above all else, his humility. The Bible says Moses was the humblest of all people on earth. And humility in a leader, and the leader's realization that he is what has become known as the servant leader. He's a servant of the people, not the boss. And that any kind of a leader in business, politics, academia. I'm thinking of my professors, seminary, graduate school, university. The ones who befriended the students, who were able to get to their level and communicate probably with them, were the best teachers. The ones who were only buried in the footnotes and the appendix usually were not, very effective. So this participation, this acceptance that it's the people who matter, which we in American democracy are expected to put above all else, although lately it's been kind of tarnished. Those are the things that make this book so contemporary and so applicable to anybody who. I had an email yesterday from a friend who is in the finance, investment investor. He read the book from his point of view as an investment expert, and he was very taken with it because he felt that it spoke to him in the world of finances, which has nothing to do with the Bible or the Exodus, but it was very relevant to him. And that kind of gave me reassurance that we're not just academics talking to each other. We're really dealing here with something that affects every last person in the world.
Okay. Well, everybody has been very properly succinct, so that we have plenty of time for discussion. If anyone has questions or comments, you can do it through the Q&A section. I would remind people that we are recording this session, and so that asking questions and participating comes within that framework of being recorded. While we're looking for questions and answers, I would like to ask each of you to look at the leadership role for Moses that you've discussed, and maybe deal with the question of contemporary and modern political thought sees importance in the separation of religious institutions and political institutions. How does Moses-style leadership fit into the modern and contemporary ideas of the importance of secularism for running society? Would any of you want to care to comment on that?
Well, I'm sure we'd all like to comment on that, so I'll kick that off only by saying we have seemingly a political class that is institutionalized, has been for a long time, not new, not particular to any party, where the belief on the part of the political leaders is that they must be reelected, that somehow things cannot function without them. And so their reelection becomes the priority. Make no comment, take no vote, say nothing on the floor that can be verified, try to stay under the radar when things get politically controversial, trump oneself up in front of cameras when you think that everybody will pay attention to you, and you can, posture yourself as stylize yourself to some form of your base. And this is not Mosaic leadership. This idea of making yourself central to the experience, that you are chosen. This was not Moses's viewpoint. The other way around. He was a reluctant participant, as has been pointed out. He was somebody who did not feel like he was the most qualified to lead, which was one of the qualities that God was pursuing. And I think when we see that contrast, we know how much further we have to go in our leadership to find that kind of not just servant leader, but self-sacrificing servant leader who is not going to make every decision every day based on staying in office, staying in Washington, not having to sell their condo or whatever, and being able to just make the right decisions based on the process, what had to be done at the time, regardless of whether it was popular, and most importantly, regardless of whether it would get them reelected. To me, that is a contrast which I think stood out, and I hope that millennials can do better with than the generation of baby boomers that has come before them.
Rabbi Schreiber?
Yes.
What do you think about secularism?
Secularism?
And its relation to Moses?
Well, I don't believe in a dichotomy of secularism and formal religion. I believe religion is a relationship between each human being and another greater force in the universe. If one chooses to call it God, great. If one chooses to call it nature, great. Universal plan, design, whatever. Doesn't matter. And not because somebody puts on the clerical garb is one ipso facto a believer and a religious person. And not because someone says, I'm not sure, I don't know if there is a God, there isn't. It's our actions that speak, not our words. And if our words can be beautiful but meaningless. So I think that even though we come from three religious traditions, the way I understand where we all three stand is that we have a very universal view of the human condition in which everyone, believer, non-believer, agnostic, atheist, whatever labels we human choose to fabricate, there is always the essential thing, which is, are you a good person? You're a good person, God loves you. Nature loves you. Your wife loves you. If you're not a good person, you can go to church, synagogue, mosque every week. It doesn't mean anything. I think this has been stated by all the three founders of these three faiths. And this is why, as I get older, and we're all getting older, it becomes clearer and clearer to me that we all of us in one little boat doing the same thing, and we are moving toward one destination. And this is something we all need to recognize. So no, they're not going to heaven because, they didn't believe in my version of God. No, no, this is all nonsense to me. To me, the good people, they're all going to the right place. The bad people have reckoning. So that's my whole thinking in a nutshell.
John, if I can add something to something that the rabbi just said, it would be one of the first things I learned when I showed up to seminary was what a professor said is the definition of church is a building where some people go to hide from God.
Yep.
And I think that guided me. That was something I found very informative at every level of my faith walk there.
Mm-hmm. Right. Dr. Yunus?
If I may add, in the way I look at secularism, one has to think, I mean, I'm not talking about philosophy and, deep political theories, but just in a general sense, whether secularism is the absence of religion or equity between religions. And religion in a very sort of broad sense, not necessarily a church and a mosque and a synagogue. And if we look at secularism as a system in which people having different values and different connections with the divine are equally treated, then that kind of secularism depends on values. Now, those values, people who are sort of focused on secularism alone themselves, they might think they can derive those values from different sources. But at the end of the day, all moral and ethical values are derivable and are derived from divine guidance. So whether a secularist recognizes one religion or another religion or another religion, he or she may recognize certain values that form the core of all interaction within society. And if we, as people of faith, can contribute those values to the society and improve the interaction between people and governance in society, then so much the better. The other thing is that in the book, actually, this was also mentioned, God or social good. And if a person is not a person of faith, he can think of God in terms of good, doing something good for society, something that's beyond oneself, something that is that really benefits everybody. And so he can think of the story of Moses not only in terms of a charge from God and obeying God and responding to God, but also in the sense of doing good, freeing the enslaved and leading to them to something better. So there's a lesson in that, and I think our book does emphasize that whether you are a person of faith or a person of faith, there are lessons to be drawn from this story. The last thing I'll quickly mention is that there is a hadith of the Prophet, the saying of the Prophet, which says something to the effect, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, is that all of us are creatures or slaves of God. And the most favored to God are the ones who are most beneficial to his creation. And so that connection of people of faith doing something good in a secular society brings us closer to the divine and benefits society at the same time. I don't know if I made a lot of sense or not.
No, that makes sense. Remember too that in the Christian scriptures, there's a debate, if not a divide, on faith versus works, and that's I track with you on that, Dr. Yunus, that the idea of how we act, right? It's the orthopraxis, not the orthodoxy. And orthopraxis often gets lost in people's pursuit of, I have all the right thoughts, I have made all the right moves, I have said all the right creeds, I'm okay. And forgetting instead that this is all supposed to lead to an action. And in the Christian context of taking care of one another, reversing the table order, this is paramount to the Christian understanding. But it has, with some people, it continues to be a struggle. Generationally, it has not always been in favor. Politically, it's very difficult for people to see that the table order should be based on who's most popular, who is wealthiest, who has the most power, perceived human power, and the powerless, the marginalized, they're on the outskirts, and whatever they get are just scraps from the table. And what Jesus was arguing for during the period of his ministry was that that's the other way around. Just as you're saying, it's how we treat others that matters, not how other people treat us. And whether we feel honored, whether we put ourselves at the head of the table or not, it was a reminder that the last shall, be first, and the people who see themselves as first shall be last. Which is why I'm a big believer in getting up every day and trying to be last. Just because I think that's my only hope. We're getting into heaven eventually.
Okay. I'm looks to me like there's a long question in the question.
We have a couple Q&A questions. Would you like for me to go and start the Q&A questions?
That sounds good.
Okay, so the first Q&A question is from, let's see, Amina McLeod Aldine, and she asks, how does Moses figure in millennial thought? So I think this is addressed to all panelists.
Well, I think we almost have to reverse that for us to be able to answer it. Millennials would have to answer where they think Moses fits into their generational understanding. What we see from our perspective is that Moses should be viewed as extremely accessible to millennials who believe that it's too late for them. They're often accused of being, they're also often accused of failure to launch, that they spent too much time in their basement, or that they're not out living their life, or they're not connecting enough, they're spending too much time online. However you want to look at some of the cliched understandings of what millennials are about, Moses was a late bloomer. Moses was a late starter. He was a palace dweller. He grew up in privilege. And it took him a while before he found what his true calling was. And we hope that many millennials will track with that too, that it's never too late to get in the game and to make a difference. We also hope that millennials will see that Moses, in some regards, is sort of the first millennial. It wasn't enough that he did work. He wanted to have meaning in his life. He wanted to bring meaning to his work, and to have his life have great impact. And this is something which I think we can effectively say Moses, in his humility at the same time, never losing track of his humility, was able to make his mark on history, which is something we hope the millennials are going to step up and do with every increasing year, as baby boomers need to let go of the wheel of power, and that's on any level in all quadrants of society.
Dr. Yunus, do you want to try and?
Just one more point that I can add is this idea of latent leadership. Now, just as you point out that Moses was born and raised in privilege, and then, of course, he was in adversity through his travels and sort of working for Jethro and so on. But there was a latent leadership in him, which came to the core when he was challenged by God to go to Pharaoh. And the idea that millennials might be thinking that maybe the system is already set, that they don't have a place in it, that they cannot shake it up and so on. But they might look at this, that when the opportunity arises, when circumstances call for it, each one of them may have some degree of latent leadership that will come to the fore when the need arises. This is like, an example, simple example would be in a crowd, something happens and somebody just jumps up and takes charge, and nobody knows where he came from or she came from, but takes charge and everybody begins to follow orders. And that's because that person had that latent leadership that came into action when the challenge presented itself. And when the challenge presented itself to Moses and God asked him to go to Pharaoh, that leadership slowly and surely came to the front. So maybe there's something for millennials to think about, that they can learn this lesson from the story of Moses.
If I may add something.
Please.
I understand this question about how we got to millennials in this kind of a book has been asked of us already several times in several of these kind of interviews. And I think what I'm hearing here is, okay, so what's the connection? What's going on here? Why millennials? And the simple answer is millennials are the generation that will step into the positions of leadership here in the United States and the rest of the world in the years ahead. And the question is it of any benefit for them to understand the Moses story, not just, the going up on the mountain, bringing the 10 Commandments, liberating the slaves, uniting his 12 tribes of Israel and taking them to the promised land. That's not really the most important part of the whole thing. Rather, we look at our society in the United States today. I think it's the most diverse society in the world. And yet, in the past 4 years, an attempt was made to send us a sort of a veiled message about white supremacy, about we whites, we are God's gift to the world. There's nothing that I detest more than calling myself a white person and considering myself superior to anyone. To me, this is blasphemy. Because first of all, we, the human race, came from Africa. And the black people are the most authentic humans on the planet, not the least important. And we live in a country, United States, God bless the United States. It's a great, fantastic country, but it has struggled with great problems that still need to be, sorted out. I thought back in the 60s when we were very active, a lot of clergy in America, myself included, were very active in the social civil rights movement. And we thought that we moved on. And here we are, 40 years later. And as if, it never happened, as if we're starting from square one all over again. It's shocking. And so I think what we have here is an attempt to show everyone that three like us can get together, speak in one voice, and say to millennials, okay, the baton is now passed on to you, and you is where we pin our hopes for the future. The three of us are moving towards the sunset, but you are moving towards the dawn. And we want you to make this dawn the best thing ever. This is really the gist of what the book says. And to tell you from my personal experience, Dr. Eunice's experience, Ian, our children and grandchildren who are on the periphery of the millennial definition give me a lot of place for hope, because I see them. Yes, they take their time, and yes, but I see that their hearts and their minds are in the right place, and given a chance, they can make a big difference. And I'm very hopeful, because what we just been through in the last 4 years, in all its aspects, political, pandemic, you name it, global climate crisis, these are big, big lessons that come either from God or from nature or from somewhere. And now we need to take a new look and find a new direction. And I think that what we try to do in this book, based on our respective traditions and our understanding of each other's traditions, is that yes, we have the tools. We don't need to walk away from the past, because if we walk away from the past, yes, there are a lot of negative things in the past, but the past also holds the key to the future. And nobody knows this better than the Jewish people. We've been around for over 4,000 years, and we've been through the worst that life had to offer, the worst, the worst. And yet we're still here, we're still optimistic, and we still think in terms of the future, not only our own personal future, but the future of humanity. This is the direction we're going, and we happen to believe that the millennials have something to say here, and I feel good about them, to put it very simply.
Remember, too, John, that Moses took the children of Israel through the desert for 40 years for a reason. It was to, over time and without draconian measures, to unify the children of Israel by weeding out those over time who had grown up in a different era under a different type of leadership, who understood themselves as slaves, who cleaved to authoritarianism because it was comforting. It was what they knew. And in order to build a new understanding of what their relationship with God, what their relationship with each other could be, he knew that they couldn't just like run off to the promised land, because then the promise would have been defeated. So in preparation for the promised land, they wandered in the desert until they were ready. And I think this is something which we can't do. We don't have that built into who we are, but it's a reminder in the Moses story of the importance of letting go of the forces and the philosophies that shaped a generation, and to say, okay, that was them, that was then, but who are we, and this is now. And this book is a call to who are we, and this is now. And I think this is where millennials shine, because many of the things that baby boomers had to struggle with, that idea of racial equality or the equality among, between men and women, or economic equality, these are things which, this generation kind of had to, spend a lot of time in media discussing and creating television shows around these plot points and whatever to try to understand it. This already comes with millennials. This is already woven into their fabric. They start there. So I think that's the promise out of this, is they start there. And we just, previous generations need to get out of their way and have them take this to this better place.
Mm-hmm. So you said there's another question?
Yes, we have a couple more questions. So I'm going to go the Q&A question from Kenneth Dante. So starts off with caption, thoughts about shattering idols. So Kenneth says, perhaps today's idols are not wood or stone, but rather overly idealized desires or imbalances of power principles. The prophetic voice, a standing outside the crowd and taking risks. What would you say is the shattering of idols in our present time?
Well, certainly our obsession with fame and money, and with celebrity, nothing wrong with that. I mean, I worked with two celebrities in the formation of this book, for example. So I can't condemn celebrity because that would be an insult to my co-authors who are stars. And I feel like there is but there is a balance that we have yet to achieve. And what does that mean? And so I think smashing idols, you know, that maybe that metaphor is a little violent for me. I think what we saw, and certainly in the Moses story, was that idols were let go of. And we know that when, you know, the conflict that comes later on with Aaron and with the, you know, the formation of this calf and the story that goes around with it, which we address in the book, it wasn't what it represented, that people will have this undulation, this relationship with celebrity and with the things which they used to think of as really super important and self-validating. And I think that's what we need to just keep moving away from that. Just, you know, let's speak truth to power. If he's going to be talking about the prophetic voice, let us always keep talking about the process and not the conclusion. Let's be willing to negotiate to a degree without giving up the goal, to be able to find ways in which things can be achieved with as much shared power as possible. This is another lesson from Moses. From the very beginning, he was cultivating the leaders that would come behind him, and they were younger. And he was often negotiating with the 12 tribes. So I think that, to me, is a better way of looking at it. Not so much the smashing like a definitive point of this is over and this is now, but finding the courage to always be willing to risk one's comfort for our principles.
Mm-hmm.
So, if I may add, I think one other aspect of this question would be the idea of service. I mean, there is when we talk about these idols, we are talking about people or institutions that have a sense of entitlement, that have a sense of superiority over others, and a sense of being served by being in certain positions. I mean, that's what idols are for. They're idols, and everybody serves them and worships them, and so on and so forth. So I think if the idea of service become institutionalized and becomes the driving force for more people than it is now, then that will help, quote unquote, shatter these idols. Also, the idea that leadership in itself is not an entitlement, that the purpose of leadership is to serve others, as not being served themselves. And this is also apparent in the story of Moses, where he starts as a reluctant leader, and then his focus throughout is how to improve the lot of the people that he was leading. In every instance that we have, he's concerned about his people. So not to belabor the point, but just to say that the idea of service, if it becomes a part of the education and the training of the future leaders, then that can sort of respond to this question of shattering the idol.
Mm-hmm. Just as a kind of follow-up on that, what is it that leadership like Moses' leadership that you're talking about in the book, what is it that Moses is leading? Is he leading a people? Is he leading a nation? Is he leading a church? What is it that he is leading, and how does that relate to what millennials might be identified with?
Rabbi?
Well, we can look at this from the perspective of 3,800 years later. And what did all of this mean for the human race? And what we learn is that there are leaders in history at certain critical points in time that move their people, and as a consequence, the human race, to a higher level of human understanding of who we are and what is expected of us, and how can we have a better world. All the way from the Stone Age, sort of a dog eat dog, the Roman Empire, homo homini lupus, man to man is a wolf. That was the Roman philosophy. Then we have Christianity, we have Islam. And so there is a certain progression. The problem is that we humans, as the great religions and the great philosophies have understood it, we're endowed with free will. We are not, moving in some kind of somebody is controlling us, and hence all we have to do is just, follow the instructions. We have a will, we have a mind, and we often make the wrong decisions. And especially at the moment when everything looks to be great and we're in a very good place, lo and behold, we have a rude awakening, as we had 4 years ago, that something can happen to us because we're too complacent. We took too many things for granted. We were not careful. We paid the price. We're still paying the price. So leadership is something that is always there to help us get out of to use the word that's used in the title, the mess. We get into a mess. Like little children get into a mess, and the parents have to extricate them. In many respects, we're not much different, even with all of our wisdom and with all of our knowledge. We get into trouble, and we have to find a way to work our way out of it and get to a better place. So this is what we're experiencing right now in a very big way. Very big way. We in this country and everywhere in the world are being challenged on many different levels. And a lot of people, I think most of us, anybody who can think, I would imagine, is wondering, what's going to happen next year? Where are we going? Do we have a future? Is it a good future? We don't know. We are now walking through the woods of uncertainty and fear, and we need somebody to come with this big staff and a big vision and say, here's what we got to do. On a lesser plane, I think of people like Franklin Roosevelt, Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, Mahatma Gandhi. These were visionaries, leaders who came along at moments of great crisis and charted a path for their people to move on and made a change in the world. This is what we are now, I think, in a sort of a waiting pattern to see those giants of the spirit and those inspired individuals who were born to be true leaders, not make-believe leaders. And I think there's a sort of a big expectation waiting for things to happen.
I want to add something to what the rabbi just said too. When we say waiting for true leaders, this is part of the purpose of the book, is to explain or to illustrate what true leadership can look like, and how millennials, by any marker of a generation that we were able to determine, seem to be well suited for, naturally gifted to. For whatever reason that may be, it just appears to be true. But I want to say that it isn't about necessarily about leadership, but it's about fellowship. And what we know about the Moses story and the blueprint for the book is that Moses was a follower. He followed God. the divine spoke to him. It stirred in him something which he was resistant to, and he followed it. He didn't have a guaranteed outcome. There was nothing about this where, other than God said, I'll be with you. You do this and I'll be with you. But he didn't know how it was going to end. There were no plot points. There was no anything where he just like, so he was being a follower in the sense that he trusted that still small voice that came from the burning bush, the one that said, follow me, follow what I'm asking you to do. And he had his conditions and he negotiated and they got it done, but he was always at the same time a leader, also a follower. And I think this is where, I think that when people, some publishers looked at this book and they said, well, there's neither of you guys are millennials, so why should you even be talking about millennials? I think, well, this is what we were led to do. There was nobody that was, if a millennial were writing this book, we wouldn't have had to, right? I mean, that's the beauty of this, is if there was nobody, there was not a zero-sum game between a millennial book and then what we were working on. Millennial authors should take up this cause. Millennial authors could start here and they could say, well, here's the strength of this. And they could say, but we're going to take it in a different direction. And that's just how it should be. That we are, when we say we're looking for the next Moses's take different forms all the time for different generations. And we're not looking for, again, some older person with a staff. That's what a lot of people thought, that's how they often think about authoritarian leaders, that these are the people that come in with a booming voice of God and say, this is what we shall do. That's not often where the prophetic voice looks like, or the form that it takes. And we can even look at somebody like Harriet Tubman and know that Moses's take different forms, and we need every type of Moses we can get to even help baby boomers. And millennials, we're turning to you to look for those and to empower yourself to not say no to that burning bush experience, to not turn down leadership on some criteria that you don't think you're worthy of or that you're not qualified for. You are, and you follow, and we'll follow where that takes you, where that leads us.
I might just add a little something to that, and that idea that when we ask the question, who was Moses leading? Of course, one can say he's leading a people and so on. But I think the basic idea here is that his leadership has a certain style, a certain foundation, a certain basis, and there were lessons that we need to learn from them. I mean, one could be leading oneself. In fact, if more of us were leading ourselves using those kind of lessons, then of course it'd be for the good of the society as a whole. And so the idea is not to focus too much on the specifics, but on the lessons that can be applied then from oneself to one's family, to a small group, to a larger group, to the national polity, to humanity at large.
So you've talked about the boomer generation and all of the other generations. I think I'm going to ask you, each of you, if you have something that you want to just close with, and we can close. And I will remind you that I'm not even a boomer. I am someone from the generation that is now called the silent generation. So as the moderator, I can be the silent generation and say, let us wrap our discussion up. If you have closing thoughts, otherwise I will say a couple of words and we can become the booming silent generation, if you will. Do any of the three of you want to have sort of wrap up closing?
Sure. Who wants to start, gentlemen?
Why don't,
Okay,
well,
I'll start. Yeah.
good.
Yeah. I think that it is of great urgency to not let this kind of a dialogue, this kind of a discussion, to just, pass us by and be forgotten. I think we are at a point in time where there's got to be discussion everywhere of where we as a human species, because I don't believe in all this race business. It's man-made, black race, white race. To me, it's nonsense. There's only one human race. We're all one. But that is a big, that's a lofty statement, but the world still needs a lot of discussion to begin to put this into reality, to realize that, and my favorite saying is from Ben Franklin during the American Revolution: either we're all going to hang together or we're going to be hanging separately. And I think those prophetic words of Benjamin Franklin are more true today than ever before. Because unless we all begin to recognize that all this conflict that has plagued the human race for so many generations today has become a luxury we can no longer afford. There's been too much. The 20th century was the bloodiest century in human history. More people died in the 20th century in the hands of men, not by natural causes, not by natural disasters, but by human evil. One evil German is responsible for the death of 50 million people in World War II. I don't want to mention names. Everybody knows that name. It's a cursed name. So it doesn't take much for an evil person to put the human race through the worst scenario possible. We are now being challenged here and now to find ways to embrace each other and get the best in each other. This is really what this is about. Moses is but an example, a sort of an inspiration, but we have to take on the mantle, not only of Moses and all the other great leaders of the past, spiritual leaders and also great political leaders who have been moving us forward. And we have to put it all to work. This is how I see it, and I hope this is what the Millennials will do.
Dr. Yunus?
Mute, Dr. There you go.
The story of Moses is already woven in the American fabric, in a sense. And, words like, phrases like the burning bush and the promised land are dropped here and there by all kinds of speakers and thinkers and so on. So it's not that we may be unfamiliar with the story of Moses, but the task now is to learn those specific lessons and not be simply using catchphrases, but using the lessons from the story of Moses. Just one quick thing, for example, and the Quran, when it talks about Moses, as I said before, is focusing on lessons more than the details. When the business of the golden calf and Moses comes back and is angry with what happened and so on and so forth, and everybody knows Samari was the one who was a culprit. There was absolutely no doubt about his guilt. But in the Quranic version, Moses asks Samari, "What is your story?" And the idea of rendering justice even to the one who may be considered absolutely, without doubt guilty, is an important concept. So there are concepts like that in the story about communication, about teamwork, about delegation, about responsibility that should become part of our everyday usage, not simply phrases, the burning bush and the promised land.
I'll close, if I can, John, by just
Please.
I'll add this. We have become accustomed to our leaders being so much older than the people who are being led. This imbalance is what we're calling for a reconsideration of. Again, to go back to where we started, this book doesn't attempt to be definitive, but just informative of that discussion. And there are many good and solid reasons to interrogate our text and to pull things out, which could lead to different types of discussions. But one thing I would maintain is it's really important for the decision makers to live long enough to have to experience the repercussions of their decisions. And this is the imbalance. Part of the imbalance we're in right now is people who are concentrating power at the top will not be around to see whether or not they were right. They just want to be right now. And they want to be able to, sort of seal this country in lucite so that when they pass, they can feel like I did it. This is just the way it should always be, just the way I came to have it accustomed to being. The Bible calls us literally against that. And this is part of why what I'm inspired by. And I hope that millennials will heed this call and see this rare opportunity and the power base that they have of these beautiful new ideas, which they don't have to struggle with. It comes baked into this generation, and they take that and they build on it. And they really do get us, even if I'm not around to see it, they get the country that I love to the promised land.
Well, this is not the end of a conversation. It certainly isn't the beginning, but it is something that we need to continue. Thank you all. Thanks to the three of you for your work, and we hope you continue in your work on this discourse, on this conversation, and help us all to understand issues of leadership and issues of faith in our contemporary world, not just the millennials, even the silent ones. Thank you so much.